gets a little nervous. He's not so sure, but yeah, he gets scared a lot. So Gideon's a little bit nervous, and he prays, and it's great, guys, that he runs to God to pray. He should run to God to pray. And that's something we see throughout Gideon's life, that anytime he's scared, he runs to God. He's not running to his friends. He's not running to other people. He's going to God. Well, he does that again in the section we're going to talk about today. In Judges chapter 7, verse 9. And it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, Arise, get thee down unto the host, for I have delivered it into thine hand. Verse 10, But if thou fear to go down, go thou with Phurah thy servant down to the host. He says, all right, tonight's the night. We are going to battle. But if you're scared, guys, does God know Gideon? He sure does. He knows where Gideon's weaknesses are. He says, if you're scared, though, sneak down to the camp with your basically like his right-hand man, Phurah. He says, sneak down. Got something I want you to hear. So, yeah, they're going to sneak down together, and they're hiding, and they're listening. Oh. Peter's listening real hard with his ears here. Listening, and this man wakes up, and he's like, oh, man, I've had a weird dream. And he wakes up his buddy in his tent, and he's like, I've had a weird dream. And he starts to tell about this dream, and he's like, man, we're just sitting in our tent, and like this cake, like barley loaf, just rolls over the tent. All right, boys and girls, you read that in the Bible, it's kind of funny. Like, can you imagine sitting in your tent and you see, you're looking out the door of your tent and your neighbor's tent just gets demolished by a cake or a loaf of bread? It's kind of a weird dream. So he sees this and he's like, and it like destroyed the tent. And the other man who's sitting there with Gideon, or not with Gideon, Gideon's hiding outside. The other man sitting there with the Midianite, he's like, that's because Gideon is going to have the victory. Their God's going to give him the victory. Boys and girls, the Midianites knew about Gideon. God had given that man that dream and his friend to interpret it. And Gideon's sitting outside the tent hearing this, and he's like, looks at his friend, he's like, yes, we're going to win. We're going to win this battle. And he's excited. He's got the confidence. We can do this. So he goes back to the men. And he gets the 300 rounded up. And he's like, all right, this is the battle plan. This is what we're going to do. Go get your trumpets. Trumpets? Yep. And when you get your trumpets, you're going to get a pitcher, like a clay pot. And you're going to get a candle, like a torch, a light. And boys and girls, have you ever sword fighted with your brothers and sisters or had a Nerf gun war? Okay, I don't think you took a trumpet to tell where you were. Usually we try to hide. And you probably didn't take a torch with you. Maybe you needed a flashlight if it was nighttime, but usually we don't try to draw attention to ourselves. But this is what the men did, okay? And they did take their swords with them as well. But they're holding in one hand their trumpets. They're holding in the other hand the torches inside of the clay jars or the clay pots. So hidden inside of the pots, you can't see it. Okay, kind of like sticking it under the jar so you can't see the light. And then they split up this little light of mine. That's right, I was thinking of that actually. I don't hide it. They divided into 3 groups. So if you take 300, you divide by 3, real easy math, you get 100 men in each group. Well, they divide and they're on a high part around the valley in 3 different groups. And Gideon tells them this is what they're going to do. When he tells them they are supposed to blow their horns and smash their pitchers. Can you imagine how loud it would be to hear 13 trumpets just blowing? Not playing a song, just making a noise. That's probably a band director's worst nightmare, that 300 trumpeters would play at the same time any random note they wanted to. But that's what they do. Can you imagine you're laying in the tent, you're one of the Midianites, and you hear that? You hear the 300 trumpets, and then you hear all the clay pots smashing and breaking. Imagine 300 dinner plates crushing. being smashed. How loud that is. You wake up out of your sleep and you're so confused. You're startled. You're like, what's going on? And then you rub your eyes and you look out the tent and you see lights all around you. You're down in a valley and all around you, you see these 300 lights. And how confused the Midianites must have been. Well, God had given them the command. When they smashed those clay pots, the Israelites were supposed to shout out the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And they did that, and they blew their trumpets, and they're making all of this noise. Now, boys and girls, I recently took my students on a field trip, and they found a place that could echo. How many of you have ever found somewhere where you could make it echo, so you purposely made it noise? Yeah, exactly. We probably all have. We wanted to hear the echo come back. Well, boys and girls, if the Midianites are down in a valley and the Israelites around, you can imagine what that echo sounded like with the 300 trumpets, the 300 breaking pots, and then them all shouting the sword of the Lord and Gideon. It was probably near deafening down in the camp. Well, they wake up. They're so confused. They grab their swords and they start fighting. They're fighting the Midianites. The Midianites are fighting each other because they're so confused. They're so alarmed. They've heard this deafening noise. They pull out their swords and they just start fighting. But the Israelites are still safely around the edge. They're not down in the valley. So the Midianites end up killing themselves. Okay, and then the remnant that flees, Gideon and his men, the Bible goes on to tell us how they tracked him down and got help. But boys and girls, whose power was it that helped defeat the Midianites? That's right, it was the Lord's. It wasn't Gideon's power. Now, Gideon obeyed, boys and girls. I hope you see that throughout this story, how Gideon prayed and Gideon obeyed. What God told him to do, he was willing to do. When he was scared, he prayed. When he needed wisdom, he prayed. And then he obeyed. God showed him what to do, and he did obey what God asked. And then we see God's power. God gave Gideon the victory because of God's power. It wasn't because of those 300 men, although they had to obey what God asked. 300 on about 1 million's really not a fair fight. But having God on your side is a fair fight, boys and girls. God overpowered them. God gave the victory to Gideon, and the Israelites were able to plant their crops and eat freely again. Boys and girls, God is so powerful. And again, that God who's that powerful loves you. He loves me. He loves you so much that he wants you to talk to him. How much do you talk to him, boys and girls? And do you obey what he has told you in his word? I hope so. I hope this week you'll be like Gideon. You'll pray and you'll obey. See you next